Welcome to the PRISM intro. If you have ever guessed your personality type, you've taken a test and it didn't seem right, and maybe you've taken a couple and you still haven't figured out, what your core type is. If you're someone who just, assigns, character traits and actions, in a very general sense, like I'm an INFP, so, and I do X, right? So this video is for you to both go into a deeper dive on what the PRISM model is, to explain to you how to get better typing for yourself, self-typing, and understand your core type and how you really operate a little bit better. So let's dive into some definitions. So according to PRISM, one of the biggest things that we emphasize is that PRISM is based off of a dynamic map of how you think, feel across several different, information elements or cognitive functions, as they're also known as, shifting with context and state. So unlike MBTI and Socionics and even some trait-based psychology models like Big Five, Ocean, all these theories are stuck in static land because you can subscribe to them, you can identify with them, but you can't assign them. You can't assign actionable, implementable, actions in life. If you're an INFJ, how do you incorporate that into your life? What are the pros, the cons? You really just have like a picture of what that type looks like, but without any application. It's stuck in theory land because it's really hard to prove in real life. And so we're going to get to that. So again, PRISM, it's a dynamic map of how we oscillate between the dynamics of ourself, between our core self and other components of ourself, which we'll get into. A function is a mental tool like introverted thinking or extroverted feeling. It's also known as an information element. It's also one of the eight main blocks. So you have 8 of these. They're all firing off at any given time based off of circumstances. This is how you process both the internal and the external world. That's a very big deal to remember. Strength versus expression, okay? How loudly one function versus another shows up in behavior and output and volume, right? So strength versus expression. Dimensionality, PRISM, unlike other personality models, measures dimensionality. Socionics does, but as you're going to see, we both measure for dimensionality and strength. The unique thing about PRISM is that PRISM also it believes that dimensionality can actually grow and contract over time. Meaning, if you're an INFJ, for example, let's just say, and you want, and you're supposed to have introverted intuition in your main primary slot of like how you really do everything in the world, right? It's like that filter that in which your whole life is kind of built and fabricated on. And sometimes in life, what happens is we either have a suppressed or we either have life circumstances that allow us to build on these cognitive functions or suppress those cognitive functions. Maybe from an upbringing, you were you weren't allowed room to fly with some of your superpowers, right? If you're an INFJ and your upbringing didn't allow you that it limited your scope of working out and practicing, and stretching your abilities, then you get in as an adult, you get somebody who has a repressed strength of that function. So we measure for both strength, expression, and dimensionality. We have the blocks, the core, the critic, the hidden, and the instinct. This goes kind of in line with Socionics here. And then we have also an overlay, your emotional band. So we're going to start to incorporate trait-based indicators in PRISM so that we can correlate your neuroticism, how stressed out you are, how calm you are, relaxed, excited, inspired. There's openness, agreeableness. So we're going to actually connect certain trait attributes to PRISM, because to bring dynamics into personality theory and to ground it into something practical, you have to be able to report the behavior that you're observing and seeing. And so by incorporating some of these new components, we're going to be able to track the dynamics and the states that we find ourselves in in our everyday lives and different life cycles. So your overlay is the emotional band, whether it's in the positive or in the negative. So it's how stable, and right now it's only accounting for neuroticism. It's how stable or reactive you are while using functions. And a new concept here is state, right? So in Socionics and in MBTI, we have something called subtypes, right? There's subtypes in those models. But the tough part about having subtypes in MBTI and Socionics and maybe even other models is that it's really just like a quick fix Band-Aid on a much bigger challenge of dynamics, right? As people oscillate between who their core type and identity is and different moments in your life, different experiences, different life experiences, transitions. And we take on different strengths and weaknesses in different states, right? And the most common are calm, stressed, or in flow, right? Which is more in your core type. And this changes with performance. And it's important that we understand that when you're getting the results that you're getting, if you're not, let's just say you take one test, that's not really going to give you a full picture, right? And what PRISM is going to solve is you take one test, it's going to give you, with as much accuracy as possible, your core type and how you deviate from that core type. So if you believe that you're an LIE, an ENTJ, or SLE, ESTP, or an INFJ, and you have your core type, and how you're going to be able to track, okay, this is my core type with this, with how I'm compared against the prototypes of this type, like what you would typically see in a perfect world. You're going to see how your strengths are greater or less than. You're going to see your dimensionality with this greater or less than. Like, are you on track for the dimensionality of where you should be at for your type, your core type? And it's gonna track all these things, right? So the biggest part is the states. You can look like different types. So if you're getting two other types commonly, this could be an indicator or a clue that these are your go-to types in different parts of your life, different modes, whether it's stress or or excitement, motivation. So there's different states, right? And the different states, I believe, are tied to different sub-core, I'm calling them states, but it could look like other core types, which again, PRISM takes the position of you have a core type, and then you oscillate, you move, you drift away in different states, okay? Type, your stable wiring pattern don't change moment to moment, your state does, right? So you're a core type and your state changes, and this is important. So if you don't take the PRISM assessment, you take any other test you've taken, what I would recommend you do is you take that same assessment every 30 days for the next, take it like maybe 3 or 4 times for the next 30 days and see how your results change. So you take it 3 or 4 times over the course of half a year, and then you can start to kind of figure out where your core type is, what's most commonly popping up. And then mantras, right? Loud does not equal deep, okay? So labels, so the same type, different state, right? So, not just because you're speaking, expressing, just because something is loud, you're emphasizing something in the real world doesn't mean it's actually who you are, right? It goes back to explaining these states. So if you've ever said, I can do X, right? I'm in, INTP, ENTJ, then this is going to speak for you, okay? Types aren't cages. PRISM shows you how to adapt across situations, right? So something that PRISM is going to solve for are the dynamics of real life. You're a core type, and how does your core type, respond in the real world? What can we actually work with and utilize to make our lives better, versus just something on paper in the ethereal, headspace of theoryland, right? It's one thing to look at, a profile and what it says you're about, but you're unique, and no one's the actual prototype, right? Everyone's got some level of deviation. So what do static models miss? Okay, so what does MBTI and Socionics miss? Well, they're binary labels. They can't retest the same score, right? So if you track MBTI and Socionics, it's very difficult based off of the typical scoring methodologies, that if you test one time for this type, if you retest it, you might get another. This is what PRISM addresses. PRISM addresses that you have different states, so that makes sense why you don't get the same test, the same core type every time, because these tests, these assessments, are not designed to incorporate state in different states you oscillate to and from. So these really just become identity cages, and then they don't really help you really understand your life in a dynamic and meaningful way, which is one of the bigger things that I emphasize. And this is what everybody cares about. You want to have an identity, sure, why not? But how do I make my life better as a result? We keep a useful structure, and we add state, depth, and context. Very big, and it's in the name, information mapping. We're mapping out. It's only going to get more intricate. So PRISM in 1 minute, it's eight functions measured 2 ways: strength and dimensionality. You have these blocks: core, critic, hidden, and instinct. We'll go into more of this in a different video. To show the mode, you have an overlay, which for now shows your neuroticism, right? How stressed or how calm you are, how emotional stability versus reactivity. And it's not a label, it's more like a dashboard. It's like a KPI for who you are. So dimensionality versus strength. So strength equals volume divided by frequency. It's volume or frequency. So it's how much it shows up in your life, right? And we all have different strengths. And like I've said earlier, based off of your upbringing, your environments, and your practice with your different, functions, you're going to have different level of strength. You also have different, you're going to have your typical dimensionality that you should subscribe to, but then you're also going to have, you're going to have flexibility in growing your dimensions. So PRISM believes that you can actually grow in dimensionality with certain with certain cognitive functions, right? Which is why as an LIE, I might come off with a little bit more introverted feeling, or have more core values than maybe the typical LIE. It's because I've spent a lot of time trying to experience and practice my internal value system and my internal relational system, right? So some examples here, right? So you have a loud 2D, two-dimensional extroverted feeler can run a room but misses long-term social consequences, right? Or a quiet 4-dimensional introverted logical type may seem understated but can model complex systems reliably. So the ceiling does not necessarily equal the volume. Performance cracks show at novelty and pressure, right? So anytime you think that someone looks like, or maybe even yourself, you say, oh wow, this person's really demonstrating a certain information element, right? Whatever. Sure, it's loud, but is it deep, right? Is it like under stress and pressure, does it really shine? And right, and that's one way. So once one telltale sign that people just have better strengths versus dimensionality. Okay. State changes performance, not type. So calm, access more of your ceiling, cleaner execution. Stress, functions narrow, tunnel vision, brittle decisions, and flow, optimal challenge, function sync, time dilation, smooth handoffs. So here's the cool thing, right? What I love about where this is going with PRISM is that when we think about the information elements and valued and unvalued cognitive functions, and again, I'm talking in terms of a lot of socionics here, but if all functions are used and implemented, and we have these different states that allow us to, if we have these states that allow us to experience, we have to experience different relationships with these information elements, then what we can see then is if you're in a flow state, information elements that you wouldn't normally be agreeable or open to now become open. You become more open and receptive to working on these functions. So if you're in a great place in life, then you might pick up you might pick up on more unvalued tendencies. You might be more open to learn and experience them and optimize your life in a certain way with them. When you're in a flow state, when you're in a stress state, your whole your whole cognitive function stack, your whole personality, your whole core type, it restricts. And when you're in a restrictive, stressed place, this is why it's so important to measure for this, is that you now all of your unvalued functions are like they're cut off, and depending on the state that you're currently like operating in, you will either demonstrate certain functions versus others. But in general, all of your functioning is going to be restricted. You're going to be less open to take on and experience and learn your unvalued side of yourself, and you're going to be more in a crisis mode versus calm, right? So I think calm into flow, those two states, that's when you start to open up to really build yourself out and to grow the other elements of yourself more proactively. So, and again, going back to the overlay, steadier affect for the cleaner access to higher dimensions, for the minus, and for the plus sign, when you get the results, right? It's reactivity, it's noise that can drown nuance or spike avoidance, right? So you're just you're in a more reactive place in this state, and you're just you just want to avoid things that you don't value, right? And it's more used as weighting, but it's not a verdict. It's just a color expression. Again, it's just on the dashboard of where you are at currently. It's not permanent, this plus or minus. This is just where you are, how you're currently expressing, with your core type and your other states in mind. So the blocks, the core, right, is your go-to strengths, like where you feel competent, right? This is your core type. Your critic is self-policing, sharp, but can be harsh and rigid. The hidden, which is aspirational, shows in safe or passion contexts. Instinct, autopilot, habits, bodily defaults, quick grabs. Which mode you're in, and is it serving you in this moment, right? And again, we'll get more into these at a later time. So let's move on here. So let's look at application, okay? So a 1-minute self-exercise, right? So pick one overused function and one underused function. Label each with current dimensions, 1D to 4D, right? Depending on what your core type could be or is, plus your strength, your low, medium, or high. And do one of these targeted reps this week, right? So if you have one-dimensional information element that you're aware of, incorporate more checklists with this, right? Get mentors, right? Get low-stake reps, meaning you want to be able to be aware of how to practice this. You need support in this area from somebody who's really great at catching you up to speed on what's what you shouldn't do, and and get like small wins with these, so that you can start mapping positive progress, not necessarily negative. It doesn't, a lot of people think, oh, if I'm one-dimensional in something, I stink. Great, you might have fails, but you can have plenty of wins. Just practice the wins, and that's one-dimensional. Two-dimensional, pair with a 3D or 4D partner, someone who's really great in this, right? Like if you have 2D extroverted sensing, go to a martial arts gym and train, right? Simulate edge cases, right? So simulate and broaden your experience level in these things. 3D, rotate contexts, teach it to somebody, right? So 3D is all about rotating different contexts and situations with this and practicing and flexing this in that way and teaching this, right? And getting really more of a diverse understanding of what you understand by teaching and ironing out. And, they say that you learn even more through teaching. Rotate context and teach. 4T, set leadership task, schedule, counter, function, review. Okay, so this is where you should lead in your own life. And this is also, if you have a 4D function, with the ones you have, you should lead by example and always demonstrate this and always align and value your life according to these parts of you, right? Because they're so strong, right? We want to envelop our life in how we easily navigate this life. Typically, your 4 dimensionals are, your primary function, right? One allied function that sits in the background that helps in processing. We'll get more into that, on a different video. But these are all different ways that you can demonstrate your different dimensional, elements. Okay, so let's recap, right? So the static labels that there are no static labels anymore when it comes to PRISM. PRISM is developing, tracking the dynamic nature of your personality, how to incorporate your core type in these different states in your real life, and in theory, eventually. This is the only theory part about it. In theory, what you will be able to do is you'll be able to rely less on coaches and therapists and more self-author your own growth, since you're going to be at the forefront of your own dashboard of you, right? More than anybody else. No one can possibly track this as much as you. And we're going to provide the tools for you to be able to do this. Grab your PRISM profile, right? Go on to PRISMpersonality.com and, take the assessment. It's pretty long, but definitely worth it. And join the Applied Personality Lab. It's a small community I have in the link below, where you'll be able to, join a small community for now of people who are really invested in growing, helping each other grow, supporting each other, and at the end of the day, becoming, an enhanced version of ourselves and just having a totally different level of awareness. That being said, thanks for checking in this intro video to PRISM. Excited to speak more on it, and as I advance the model and, what else is going to come to light. Talk to you soon.